I have been part of many seances and have hosted many seances at this point in my spiritual career, and this is a topic that was highly anticipated and voted on by my channel members, so we're doing it today. Let's talk about how to host a seance. There are going to be some prerequisites for this video. I have 3 other videos that I would highly recommend watching first before proceeding with the following information that I'm going to give you, because it does lay a good, strong foundation. The first video is called How to Work with Spirits, and it really is just a basic, broad, general overview of what I classify as a spirit, how to improve your psychic abilities, communicating with spirits, building relationships. It talks about boundary setting, having realistic expectations, and kind of this idea of spirit hierarchies. Again, it is a very, very basic overview, but I do think that that video can give a lot of context as to what we're going to be talking about in this video. The second video that I would recommend is How to Scry. So I'm going to assume that you know at least one system of divination, whether it is tarot cards, runes, oracles, dowsing rods, how to scry through either a crystal ball or through the flames of a candle or the smoke from an incense. You can even scry with a bowl of water. So definitely check out my video titled How to Scry. I do think that scrying is one of the most accessible forms of divination because you really don't need any fancy tools, any fancy tarot decks. Again, you can scry through a bowl of water. So go watch my video on how to scry, because there is going to be divination involved in this process of hosting a seance. So I am assuming that you know what divination is and that you know of at least one system. You are somewhat familiar with operating that. You don't have to be an expert by any means, but it does help the process. I personally like working with dowsing rods in seances, and we're going to be talking about all this divination again a little bit later in this video. The third video that I would suggest is Can Spirits Lie? Because yes, they absolutely can lie. Please go watch that video as well. I think it's going to give you a lot more confidence when working and dealing with spirits. Now, in a seance, the type of spirits that we're typically talking to are loved ones that have passed on the other side, right? If we think about what is our goal for the seance, what are we doing here? Are we sitting down just opening the door for anyone to come in and speak to us? Do we have a specific person that we're trying to contact? Identifying the goal of the seance is going to be one of the first things that you want to do. I would highly suggest that if this is your very first seance and you're not really comfortable with all of these methods and techniques yet, try to really hone in what your goal is for the seance, as in attempting to contact one specific person. I would not suggest sitting down to do a seance with your friend on Halloween night and just opening the doors for anyone and anything to come through. That is a recipe for disaster. Please don't do that. Now, I will say, having hosted many seances myself at this point, I do find that I like to get adventurous. Sometimes I do host a seance where I do not have anyone in particular in mind that I'm trying to contact, and I really do just want to call in whoever wants to chat. But I also know how to hold the space. I know how to communicate with these spirits. I know how to banish them if things go awry. So if this is your very first time, try to think of your goal for the seance and who it is specifically that you are looking to speak to. Again, for a ritual like this, we're usually hoping to talk to ancestors or other loved ones that have passed on. So let's talk about what the Victorians used to do. I'd like to give a little bit of historical background on seances and how they used to operate in the Victorian era. And then afterwards, we're going to tweak that a little bit, because I have found methods that I personally think are a lot more effective. So yes, you can host a seance with just yourself. In the Victorian era, however, it was recommended that you would have 3 to 12 people. And it was really important to consider the energy of the participants. You would either have 1 to 2 mediums max, no more than 2 mediums as part of a group. It was said that if you had more than 2 mediums, that was way too much energy. So you'd really try to stick to one person in particular that is leading this seance. So they would select the participants and they would be really careful about the type of energy that was in that space. And it was said that spirit communication was really dependent on this magnetic or chemical balance between people. Positive temperaments and negative temperaments were considered when choosing the participants. A negative temperament tended to be associated with women, which was actually considered the ideal personality type for a medium, whereas men were typically considered to have a positive temperament and less ideal for being a medium. So there would have to be the right balance between these positive and negative temperaments when choosing who's going to be involved. I do think that that is something that is very much stuck in the Victorian era. Anybody that conducts seances today, I've never seen anyone really consider that, myself included, especially because we have these evolving ideas of gender, masculinity versus femininity. And so considering the temperament isn't really something that I do when I'm sitting down creating a group. I do think though that it is helpful to have at least one leader of the seance. So this would be someone that has shown at least some skill with their psychic abilities. They don't need to be an expert in leading something like this, but having a medium present or someone that is tapped into spirit communication outside of the seance is going to be really helpful. After selecting who is going to be involved in this ritual, the Victorians would then dim the lights. It was always in a dim atmosphere, and it always seemed to revolve around some sort of wooden table, which I found really interesting because in my own experimentations, I always have the most success when working with a wooden table. And it turns out the Victorians believed that the wood in the table could actually be a conduit for this spiritual activity. So that I do agree with the Victorians on. For some reason, using a wooden kitchen table, for example, seems to perform the best. The medium would then instruct everyone to hold hands or place their hands on the table, palms down, and the person leading the seance would then begin, either by going through a short meditation with everyone, reciting some prayers, playing some music, reading some poetry. You weren't just sitting in silence waiting for things to happen. It was a very active experience, and people would actually get together on a weekly basis and perform these seances. One point that I want to make here is that when we're working with spirits, spirits have their own autonomy. They don't have to show up if they don't want to show up. So there may be times where you have a seance that is not successful in the sense the spirits decide not to show up. And this was very apparent in the Victorian era as well, and why people would get together on a weekly basis to host these seances. Not every single seance is going to result in some incredible spiritual activity. And typically, if mediums observed no activity whatsoever, they would close down the ritual space after about an hour. When you were working with spiritual beings that have their own autonomy, can make their own decisions, I don't want you to be discouraged if you sit down to do a seance for the first time and nothing happens. Again, that is why the Victorians would meet up so regularly, every single week for months perhaps, to try to experience more spiritual phenomena. Now, after the person leading the seance has guided everybody through some sort of meditation, there have been some prayers, there's been some music, you would then focus on your 5 physical sensations. So what are the things that you are hearing, seeing? Are you tasting anything odd? Do you have any sort of intrusive thoughts coming in that seem really odd or not your normal thought patterns? We're going to talk about this a little bit more when we get to my seance outline, but I think managing expectations here is really important because it is often not these grand exaggerated things such as a chandelier crashing to the ground or all the windows flying open. Sometimes the spirit messages do come in a lot more subtle in the form of intrusive thoughts, body aches that weren't there beforehand, temperature drops. I have been in seances myself where everyone suddenly feels really cold. And then when working with another spirit, all of a sudden everybody's starting to sweat and they're taking off their coats. So paying attention to the 5 physical senses is a really good way to assess who it is that you're working with and if someone is present. And yes, of course, like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, you can do a seance solo. You do not have to have 3 to 12 participants as the Victorians used to do. But I will say it's sometimes more difficult to do this by yourself, especially if you happen to be a more critical thinker. I have noticed when I've received the feedback from those who have done solo seances, they can't get out of their head and they're questioning what they're experiencing. So when you have someone else present with you or a group that's going through this with you, you can kind of bounce ideas off of each other. Oh, did you hear that? Did you feel that? Are you also cold? I'm feeling a pain in my left knee. That seems really strange. And so it's nice to be able to receive the feedback of others. If you'd like to learn more about Victorian spiritualism, I highly recommend checking out this book. It's called Spirits, Seers, and Seances by Steele Alexandra Duras. Now, we read this in my book club a couple months back, and there were some mixed reviews. I personally really enjoyed this book. I would say, though, it's more heavy on the seers and Victorian spiritualism and a little bit lighter on the seances part. So I'm more so recommending this book if someone is interested in Victorian spiritualism and all of the cool paranormal stuff that was happening during that time. I do think it's a wonderful gothic read for this time of year, and it's so interesting. It's one of those nightstand books where you can just put it on your nightstand, read a chapter every night, and learn about something new that the Victorians were experimenting with. I would like to give a very general seance outline here. This is the typical ritual flow that I go through when I'm about to host a seance. There are some things that I adjust over time here and there. It depends on the people that are involved. It depends on who we're contacting, but this is probably the skeleton bare bones of my normal ritual flow. The first step in hosting a seance is to make the space sacred. So you're going to be setting out a lot of different things here, and it really just depends on what your goal is, who you're trying to contact, how many people are involved, the space that you have available to you. Preferably you have some sort of big wooden kitchen table. That's the most ideal situation, but some of us don't have that, and you just have a small space on the floor, and that's fine too. Some of the things that you might want to set out are various types of divination. Even if, let's say, you are only skilled with dowsing rods, or you are only familiar with tarot cards, or maybe you've only tried scrying once or twice, especially if there's going to be other people involved in this ritual, I would recommend setting out a bunch of different types of divination. Set out a crystal ball or a piece of black obsidian or a black mirror for scrying, or perhaps that bowl of water. Break out the pendulum and the pendulum board. If you have a spirit board, we're going to be talking about spirit boards in particular later on in this video. Highly recommend having one of these in your seances. This is not something to be feared. Unfortunately, spirit boards get a bad reputation because of the Ouija board, but that is all marketing and Hollywood horror movies, and spirit boards are no different than any other form of divination. They are not some evil board that's going to open up a portal where demons are going to come out and snatch all of you. It is just another form of spirit communication. So gather all the divination systems that you have. Again, it could be tarot cards, runes, oracle cards, maybe even bibliomancy. This is something I've brought into a seance once. If there's someone that you're trying to contact that happens to be an academic or someone who had a favorite book, bring that book in and then use that book by way of bibliomancy, where if you are feeling called to open the book to a random page and read a sentence out loud, that can help you decipher some of the messages you might be receiving. So here are some of my personal tools that I tend to set out for people. These are my tarot cards. I usually have a couple different decks available for people to choose from when we're all sitting around the table together. So I just like the regular Rider-Waite-Smith tarot deck, but I do have some other decks that I will pull out as well. This is my pendulum and pendulum board. This is actually a wooden pendulum. I always seem to have the best luck with wood. I think it's similar to the idea of doing this on a wooden table. But as you can see, the pendulum board has yes, no, unknown, and maybe. And you would hover the pendulum over the board and try not to move. And then ask your questions and see if you get a yes or no. This is my crystal ball for scrying, though I do have a black mirror as well. Sometimes I will bring a black piece of obsidian to scry through. But again, there's many different ways that you can scry, and you can just do it through a bowl of water. These are my dowsing rods. So these are made from copper, and these are my favorite to use in a seance. So you would hold them out like so, one in each hand. And if they move and cross together like that, that would indicate a yes. If they move outwards away from each other like that, it would indicate a no. And so just like the pendulum, you would want to try to keep your arm as still as possible and allow the spirit to answer. If you have not worked with dowsing rods before, highly recommend you research them and experiment with them. They can be really fun to work with. And so this is the spirit board. We have the planchette here, this little piece that moves around. Again, we're going to be talking about spirit boards specifically a little bit later on in this video, but they truly are nothing to be feared. The Ouija board has really made a bad reputation for spirit boards themselves. And spirit boards, for those that are not aware, is the giant broad category of boards like this, where they have the letters, you have a hello, goodbye, sometimes you have some numbers, a yes and a no, and you would hover your hands over the planchette and allow the spirit to assist you in moving to the right letters or the right numbers. So make sure you just have an array of different devices to work with during the seance. That way you don't have to get up and move around if you change your mind and, let's say, don't want to use the tarot cards anymore. The reason why it's so important to set out all these different types of divination is because different spirits communicate differently. There have been many times where I'm sitting down with my dowsing rods, attempting to communicate with a spirit, and this spirit is not interacting with my dowsing rods whatsoever. I know that they are present. I have confirmed that they are present, but I'm not really getting any clear messages. So I will then switch to tarot, or I will then switch to scrying. Every spirit is going to be a little bit different in the way that they communicate. Some will just communicate in mental pictures and physical sensations. So it's nice to have all of these things laid out in your ritual space so that you don't have to get up, go to the next room, and break your trance in order to grab your tarot cards, because suddenly suddenly now you really need them. You're also going to want to lay out an offering to the spirits. Highly recommend cooking them a meal. Food and drink is so effective, and I find that almost every spirit will accept an offering of food and drink. So oftentimes at past coven retreats, we have made a whole feast, or we've made a meal that is really hearty, maybe like a hearty soup or something with some crusty bread, and then you're sitting out a glass of red wine with it. And you would simply make them a small plate and you would set that in the center of the table. Later on, when we get further into the seance outline, we're going to talk about how you actually give the offering to the spirits and what you say, but we're not there yet. We're just setting up the space and making it sacred. So offer some food and drink, offer some candles. One thing I will say about seances is that they are always best performed by candlelight. Turn off all of the big lights. Try to make it as dim of an experience as possible, because that helps you get into an altered state. It lulls you into having a trance experience. So get out a bunch of candles, line them up on your table if you have the space to do so. Try to make it bright enough to where you could read a tarot card if you're pulling it from the deck, but try to make the space as dim as possible. This also helps with scrying, because oftentimes with scrying, you want it to be in a darker room so that way you can see the reflections, you can see the images shifting, you can scry through the flame of the candle or through the smoke of the incense that you choose to burn. Now, incense is also important. If you are a little bit more on the nervous side, I would recommend burning frankincense, especially because frankincense has notoriously been used to clean out a space of any sort of malicious energies. So if you are nervous, burn some frankincense incense in your ritual space. Not only can the aromatics be an offering to the spirits, but it can also kind of help manage the energies in the space as well. Now, I personally prefer to burn mugwort because, like the candles, it does help induce an altered state. Mugwort has always been great for lucid dreaming and any sort of astral experiences. So I like to bring in some mugwort to burn, but frankincense is really great for a beginner. You might also want to consider music, or perhaps some drums, some rattles. If you're planning on doing a guided meditation, which again, we will get to in a moment, you're going to want something to aid in that experience, right? So I usually prefer some low monotonous drumming, and I do bring in my rattle into the space when I'm doing the guided meditations. But once the seance starts, it's silent. We do not have music playing. This is just in the very beginning when you're doing that meditation and getting yourself into the altered state. If you are unfamiliar with meditation and getting into altered states for ritual, I do have two other videos that I'm going to recommend. One is an occultist guide to brainwave states. The second is an occultist guide to meditation. So I have got you fully covered in this video if you need to kind of refresh your mind on some of those topics. Another thing to add into the ritual space is a belonging. So let's go back to the goal of this seance. What is your goal? Who are you trying to talk to? If you were trying to speak to your grandmother that passed, do you have something that belonged to her? A piece of clothing, a trinket, perhaps a wedding ring, even a picture will suffice. Find something, if anything, that you can bring in that can be a link to the person that you're wanting to speak to. If you don't have an item like this, that is perfectly fine. Just try to work with whatever you can. Lastly, in your ritual space, I would recommend having a big bowl of salt water somewhere off to the side. You're not going to need it during the seance. This is for when the seance is done and everyone needs to ground and come back to reality. This is going to be really controversial because many people will say that you need it to be holy water. I disagree. I think some spring water with some sea salt added, or pink Himalayan salt, or whatever kind of salt that you have, just add it to the water. That is perfectly fine for the grounding process that I'm going to take you through, because we are going to talk about banishing methods and how to really center and ground yourself after performing this seance. So for now, you're going to have a bowl of salt water somewhere off to the side in your ritual space. Let's talk about the guardian spirit. This is something that I have begun utilizing in the past 2 years or so when I've hosted seances, and I've had hit or miss results, and I want to share my experience. So if you are someone that's a little bit more nervous, again, if you're watching this and you've never experienced a seance before, you want to do it for the first time, but you are worried about potentially malicious spirits trying to come in, have a guardian spirit there for you. The purpose of the guardian spirit is to really watch who's coming into the space and kick them out if necessary. Now, there's many different guardian spirits that you could employ. It could be an ancestor of yours that you trust, maybe your grandma or grandpa, or maybe you have a spirit guide that you're really close to that you want to call into ritual. I would recommend calling in a spirit guide that has a little bit more authority and a little bit more power to kick people out. So I personally like to work with Archangel Michael. Not everyone's going to love that. Not everyone enjoys working with angelic beings, but I do find that Archangel Michael is a fantastic fantastic guardian spirit for the space. Here has been my experience though. I find that sometimes he may be a little bit too aggressive in kicking people out, so he would be great to use. And I'm going to give you a brief rundown of how you would bring him into the ritual space, but what I found is that sometimes he's a little too aggressive, and the spirit communication is actually too dull and too quiet for my taste. Sometimes he kicks people out prematurely. So the rituals that I have done with Archangel Michael, yes, he is a fantastic bouncer, but there's always been a little bit less spiritual activity, or we'll have someone come in and then that spirit is quickly kicked out if they try to do any sort of funny business, which I think is good in theory, right? But personally, when I'm in a seance, I'm a little bit more bold and I want to have that interaction with the spirit. So really, if you're a beginner, try working with Archangel Michael. He's going to make it a really safe environment for you. If you build a relationship with him, he should make it a safe environment for you. And that can alleviate some of the stress with doing this for the very first time. Then when you feel a little bit more bold, maybe consider not having a gatekeeper spirit present, especially when you get confident with banishings and such and spirit communication in general through various divination systems. You're probably not going to need a gatekeeper spirit further along in your development. So if you choose to bring in someone like Archangel Michael, bring him an offering as well. He loves frankincense incense. He also loves red candles. You can bring in some iron into the ritual space as well for an offering. And you can also read prayers to Michael as part of the process of the seance. Now you have fully set up the ritual. It is time to begin. Now at this point, you're going to want everyone to join hands. Either that or again, place everyone's hands face down on the table. For some reason, don't ask me why, it always seems to be more effective when everybody holds hands, so that's what I usually recommend. The person leading the seance is now going to lead everyone into some sort of meditation. This can be a guided meditation you found on YouTube or on Spotify. It can be something that comes from the heart. You can do a body scan where you start from the top of your head, work down to your toes, and relax each muscle group along the way. You can add in any specific prayers here if you have a specific guardian spirit you're working with that's not Archangel Michael. But the whole point is to really start getting into an alpha brainwave state and to start feeling that trance-like existence. You are sort of between the worlds. You're in a liminal space. You have the mugwort incense burning or the frankincense burning. You have everything lit up by candlelight and nothing more. At this point, everyone still has their hands joined. You are all going to count back from 10 to 0. So here in the seance, I would recommend turning off all music. No need to do drumming or rattling. Silence is necessary. And everyone is going to count back from 10. You are going to slowly work back 10, 9, 8, all the way until you hit 0. And when you hit 0, that is when you are in the liminal space and spirits can come forward to make themselves known. I am going to put some generalized text on the screen. Feel free to modify this as you see fit. This is a very generalized overview of what you can say in your own ritual. So you want to start by offering what you have on the table to the spirits. You can say something like, "We offer this meal in your honor as a token of respect and gratitude. Please receive it and join us here tonight. Spirits who are with us, we ask for your presence to be felt. Give us a sign, make your presence known in a way that we can make sense." If you want to work with Archangel Michael specifically and you would like to call him into this space as a gatekeeper, this is something, again, very basic that you could say. There's so many ways to call upon Archangel Michael. There are ceremonial magic methods, there are more folk magic methods. Again, please feel free to edit this as you see fit. We invoke thee, Archangel Michael, protector of the realms. Come forth, O Michael, and stand as our divine protector and gatekeeper this night. Please accept our offerings. In return, we ask that you draw your flaming sword of protection. Let no spirit of malice or ill intent enter this sacred space. With your mighty wings, shield us from harm. With your sword of truth, sever any connection that does not serve the highest good. Stand vigilant, O Michael, as we call upon the spirits, so that only those aligned with divine will and our highest good may enter. We honor and bless your name, Archangel Michael. Be our steadfast protector now and always. Now we are going to call forth any spirits that we specifically want to speak to. So in this case, if you have a grandma that you would like to call forth, now would be the time. Our beloved spirits of the dead, ancestors, and guides, we call you forth. Only those spirits invited may enter. Now obviously here you would insert the person's name that you were trying to contact. And here's what I would suggest from this point. Again, I want to manage expectations. Spirits can come if they want to, and they don't always come for a myriad of reasons. There are so many reasons why spiritual activity may not occur in a seance. And I want to encourage you not to be discouraged if you do not receive the messages that you were hoping to hear. Everyone can release each other's hands at this point and pick up some sort of divination system in front of them. And if they feel called to pull tarot cards or use the dowsing rods or scry, then they can definitely do so. But I would recommend sitting for a moment in the silence and going back to your five senses, noticing how you feel. Is there a temperature drop? Is everyone feeling suddenly cold, suddenly warm? Are you getting those intrusive thoughts, these thoughts that are not really your normal thought patterns? Maybe you're starting to see colors or images come in that are completely random and seem really odd, or maybe you're feeling physical sensations such as an ache in your left elbow, or maybe a little bit of a headache. This next bit is imperative. You are going to state out loud what you are experiencing for the rest of the group to hear, but without your own interpretation of it. So let me give an example of this. Let's say I'm sitting in the seance and I am starting to get some left elbow pain. I would simply state out loud, I'm experiencing some left elbow pain. That's it. I would not add an additional interpretation of, oh, ow, my elbow hurts. I wonder if this spirit broke their arm at some point. I recommend leaving out the interpretations because we want to try to remain as objective during this experience as possible. Let's say your friend is calling their grandmother forth and you are starting to experience that left elbow pain, but you don't know whether or not that grandma ever broke her left elbow. Simply state out loud, I am experiencing some left elbow pain. And the person who has called their grandma forth can either confirm or deny, if that makes sense. They can say in that moment, actually, yeah, my grandma always had left elbow pain. That makes sense. Or, I'm not really sure that fits the spirit that I was hoping to call forth, but let's keep going. Let's keep noting things. What I've noticed in seances, and this is something really, really cool that happens, is that everyone starts weaving a story together and things do kind of click and make sense. Sometimes you don't even need the divination systems in front of you. You don't need the crystal ball or the spirit board. They're great for having conversations, don't get me wrong, but I have noticed that a lot of people do experience visions or various physical sensations, and everyone talking out loud, sharing their experiences, you're kind of able to better identify what type of spirit it is that you're working with, and if that is the spirit that that person called forth. This is also why it's helpful to have other people in the ritual space and not just do it solo. I'd like to give an example here. I was once in a seance with my friend Justin, which many of you know, the Witch of Enchantment, and he had called someone forth. I was using the dowsing rods to communicate with this spirit, and it was giving us some yes and no answers. He asked a question that I did not know the answer to, which is good because we needed that to stay objective. The spirit was able to give me the answer. I was using the dowsing rods and it ended up giving us a yes or a no. I can't remember what the question was at the time. And Justin was able to identify that this spirit was not who they said that they were, because the way that his spirit would have answered that question would have been different than the way this spirit chose to. So if you can always have at least one or two other partners, highly recommend it for this reason. I will say I've never had a seance last under 2 or 3 hours, and it is exhausting. So there is a lot of energy expenditure here because you're feeding off each other's energies, you're noticing the space, you're checking in with your 5 physical senses constantly, you're perhaps switching divination systems with another person, maybe you're just getting dead energy with your cards and you want to switch with your partner and work with the crystal ball for a little bit. It's a lot of energy, so I do recommend checking in with yourself, seeing when you're starting to get really tired, because you don't want to be doing this when you're tired. And if anyone feels uncomfortable at any point, the ritual needs to immediately stop. That is something that I need to stress. The entire ritual should stop, not just that one person getting up and walking away. In fact, I would recommend not having anyone walk away from the space until the entire ritual is complete. And this is just for closure purposes, to make sure that no spirits are following a person back to their bedroom, no spirits are lingering. Once you begin the ritual, everyone stays in that ritual space until it is fully completed. And so if someone is feeling uncomfortable, then the entire thing needs to stop. So you're going to continue noting sensations. It's helpful to have a journal as well if you want to write down. You're having some automatic messages coming through via writing. Again, we're going to talk about using the spirit board a little bit later in this video. There was one time in a seance where I had this weird sensation that I was getting really nauseous and really dizzy. And I wasn't the only one either. So I had noted this in the ritual space. I had said, wow, I'm feeling really nauseous. I'm feeling really dizzy. And when others were reporting the same, we almost felt like we were seasick, maybe on a boat or something, which could kind of indicate the type of spirit that we were working with. Maybe they were a sailor at some point, but it turned out that the spirit was actually an alcoholic, and we were all starting to feel really nauseous and kind of drunk. So this is just another example of how helpful it is having other people in the ritual space experiencing the same things as you, so that you can kind of deduce what's potentially happening. And of course, you use your divination to confirm, right? You pick up your dowsing rods or your tarot cards and you ask, is this statement correct? Yes or no? Are we on the right track? Was this your career? Was this where you were from? And so on and so forth. Now, again, going back to that video I mentioned, can spirits lie? Of course spirits can lie. So that is why I recommend watching that other video as well, because what a spirit tells you may not always be the truth, and that's something that we need to be wary of. So let's say you've been going at this for a couple hours, right? You've been doing some divination with your friends, you've got some messages, you've gleaned some insight, you're ready to close down the ritual space. Let's talk about the closing. So you're gonna have everyone link hands again, and you can say something similar to, we thank the spirits who have come forth tonight. May you return to your realms in peace, knowing that you are always welcome in our hearts. And then again, if you had called upon Archangel Michael, you're gonna wanna release him from the ritual space as well. So you could say something like, by the light of the divine and by the authority of Archangel Michael, we release all spirits present. No energies shall linger in this space. Return to your rightful places, and may peace be upon you. We thank you and we bid you farewell. Archangel Michael, we ask you to seal the gate and protect our space as we conclude this sacred gathering. Thank you for being our protector this evening. Now everyone is going to count back up from 0 to 10. So remember in the beginning where everybody counted down from 10 to 0, now we are going from 0 to 10. So we are going to start with 0, 1, 2, all the way back up to 10. And at this point, I recommend clapping loudly, ringing some bells, shaking off the excess energy, really grounding yourself. You might choose to do a grounding meditation again. You can eat a piece of chocolate, drink something, get out that bowl of salt water. What I always have everyone do post-seance that seems to be so effective is to dunk their hands in the salt water bowl, and you can add protective oils in there too if you want to. You can add herbs, you can add whatever correspondences you want to this bowl of salt water that helps you with grounding and protection and such. But you have your hands submerged in the salt water, and you're just going to take a moment to visualize any potential residual energies moving from the top of your head out to your arms, from your feet up and then through your arms and into the salt bowl, just to cleanse it all and to get back to reality. Some would argue again that you need holy water for this. I find a bowl of salt water works just fine. Now you celebrate. Again, you clap loudly, you dance, you shake off the energy. After the seances I've hosted, there's always been some sort of dessert or cake afterwards where everyone is kind of laughing and talking about what happened during the seance. It just brings the mood back up. It brings the energy back up because so much energy is drained in this ritual that it's nice to be able to sit down with friends afterwards and, oh my gosh, that was so crazy. Did you experience that too? What did you think about this? It's fun to be able to recount the whole experience and do that over cakes and ale or whatever type of dessert you pick for yourselves. Additionally, you're going to want to cleanse yourself and cleanse your space afterwards. So you can do this with a simple smoke cleanse. Again, if you have that frankincense incense, that is what I personally prefer. You can also use rosemary, is fantastic for this. You could also use some garden sage. There's many different things that you could use. So frankincense and rosemary are my go-to. But you're going to want to take some smoke and then run it down the front of your body. Have someone run it down the back of your body. Do the same for everyone in the ritual space. And then feel free to actually cleanse some of the items that you used as well. So you can smoke cleanse over the kitchen table if that's where you all sat. Open up some windows, allow that smoke to go out, blow out the candles, clean up the food items. At this point, I've had a lot of questions about food offerings and whether you just throw them in the trash afterwards. I usually give it back to the earth. So I will actually go outside and either add it to my compost or if there's some brush or something and it's okay for the animals to eat, I will literally give the food back to the earth. But if you don't have a space like that and you do need to just throw it in the trash, that is perfectly fine. The spirits already accepted that offering. I don't personally like to eat the offering after it's already been given in a ritual. Something about the food, for me, it tastes weird. It tastes different. I don't know. Maybe that's just a me thing. I don't feel good eating the food that I have offered to other spirits. In my mind, they have taken the essence of that food with them, and so I'd rather just give it back to the earth for it to be recycled. People can send me to the loony bin for that one. I don't really care. It's just a thing. Let's talk about banishing a spirit if things go awry. There are entire books about protection magic and banishings, and I am not going to be doing this topic justice in a video like this because I do not have the time to go over all the different ways to banish a spirit. But if you have done as I've instructed in this ritual so far, it is highly unlikely that you are going to need to banish a spirit because there are so many precautions that we have taken up until this point, especially if you're burning frankincense incense, that's already going to deter any sort of malicious entities, especially with the prayers, bringing Archangel Michael in. You've already got a gatekeeper and a bouncer to deal with that kind of stuff. So you really shouldn't have any issues with malicious spirits in your space. But let's say you're working with a spirit, you don't want to talk to them anymore, and you really want them to leave. The first thing that you're going to do is state something with authority. You're going to state your boundaries here. You're going to say, you have no power here. By my authority and by divine light, depart in peace. You want to start by asking nicely. And in most cases, the spirit will just leave. Also, if you have Archangel Michael present, you can say something along the lines of, Archangel Michael, sever the connection and please protect all within this space. Then you can take your frankincense incense and walk counterclockwise around the entire ritual space. That can also banish the spirit. I do really enjoy agrimony, so if you can make a little incense blend beforehand, if you are a little bit nervous, you want to make sure you've got the big guns, I recommend taking a little bit of frankincense resin, grinding it up really small, and then adding in some dried agrimony. Ooh, that is a powerful combo in my opinion for banishing a spirit. Then you can burn that in your ritual space if you really, really need to. Then afterwards, you all can go back to a grounding meditation to kind of settle after a banishing, because it can be a really unpleasant experience, right? Asking a spirit to leave and having to assert your dominance in that way. So feel free to do some sort of grounding meditation and either proceed with the seance or decide to just completely stop the ritual at that point. You can also use banishing gestures. So if you're someone that likes to work with the cross or the pentacle, those two symbols can be used for protection, and you can trace those in the air as you're moving counterclockwise around the space, burning your chosen incense. Sound can be used as well. So some people will ring bells to break up the energy in the space. You can have someone follow counterclockwise with a bell, ringing it. I know as a joke, some people say break out the pots and pans and just bang them in the space to kick the spirit out. Sound does play a really, really big role in just breaking up the energy of the space in general. Beyond that, I have never had to use anything more extreme than that. And in fact, I have never had to do a full banishing of a spirit in a ritual space. But those are some protective measures that you can take just in case. Now let's talk a little bit more about spirit boards. So this is my spirit board. This one's from the Spellbound Society. It's really beautiful. It's my favorite. You've probably seen it on this channel 1,000 times. I cannot find my planchette though. I don't know what's going on today. I think the spirits are messing with me and they think it's funny to hide my planchette. But anyways, you would normally have a little tiny planchette that you would move around the spirit board to try to communicate. As I mentioned in the beginning of this video, a spirit board is just another form of divination to contact spirits and speak with them. It is literally nothing to be feared, especially if you're taking all the precautions that we've talked about in this video so far. You've already set up your ritual space for success. You already potentially have a gatekeeper spirit. You've already called in the spirits that you want to work with and kicked out any sort of malicious spirits that you don't want in the space. So at this point, there is not anything additional that you're really going to need to do to use this safely, because in this ritual that we've already laid out, you've already taken the precautions. But what you are going to want to do, I have always had the best luck with spirit boards when I'm using it with other people. I personally have never had great luck when I use it solo. I think it's because I am way too critical and rational minded. And so for me, if it is just me, I question myself and the validity of where the planchette is moving. So I recommend using a spirit board with someone else. So you would at least have 2 people with your hands on the planchette, and you want to kind of have it loosely on the planchette. You don't want it to be really pushing it down, and you are just going to allow it to guide itself. And I cannot stress how incredible this feels for the very first time when you feel the planchette move and you are not moving it, and you know that your friend is also not moving it, but it just kind of goes to the letters that it goes to. I think that's what freaks people out the most, is that they don't understand how this planchette is moving. And it likely is due to the micro movements in our hands, but it is such an unconscious thing that I do think the spirits can kind of work through our hands and give us really accurate messages that way. So you're going to ask clear questions questions. You might want to ask, what is the first initial of this person's name? Just to confirm this spirit that you've already kind of been working with other forms of divination, and you want to really hone in who it is specifically that you're speaking to. Or maybe you're hoping to get a specific date, like 1990 or something. When you are done with the spirit board though, you are going to move the planchette to goodbye. And I like to say a little something like, thank you, Spirit, for communicating with me this evening. We release you now, go in peace. And then I will finish with a pentacle for protection. That is just a me thing. You certainly do not have to do that, but make sure you move the planchette to the goodbye when you are done. And then continue to close out the ritual, as I had already said, right? You are already being more than responsible throughout this entire process, so there's really not much more that you need to do for the spirit board specifically. And that's it. I hope you found this guide really helpful. Would love to hear your own tips and tricks if you are someone that has hosted seances and you have other things that you've tried that have made it really effective. I've been able to hone down over the years what really works for me, but again, this is just what works for me. Others may find different methods that work better, and that is just fine. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in another one soon.